So this session, in case you've not done the reading here, this is the session that's going to focus on growth mindset and high expectations. If it's not what you came for, leave now. It's fine. In this session, we're going to explore a little bit of the research, a little bit of the practice. We're going to hear from Carol Dweck and John Hattie in video. They'll be coming to you recorded via video. The session, the 90 minutes, is really built for us to kind of do some exploration of both of these things and think about how they come together. The big punchline purpose is, as participants, I'm hopeful you'll engage this learning statement. I will connect what I believe with what I practice. At the core of growth mindset and high expectations is that kind of mind, heart, hands connection. That all three of these need to come together. That if we believe certain things, we're going to practice certain things. And so I want to kind of draw those connections a little tighter around this theme of growth mindset and high expectations. So in the 90 minutes, we're going to start off with a little bit about why we care about this, why we're in this conversation. I'm going to share a little bit from my personal story, and we're going to kind of dig into yours with each other. Then we'll dig into growth mindset, high expectations, and then make sense of those two things together. We've put together a number of supportive resource materials for you that are available on your thumb drive. It does not include this PowerPoint, but I was told that they'll be uploading everything. So you will have the PowerPoint in the final uploads to the website for the conference. There's probably 3 slides that I'll show you that I think are worth writing down out of all of them, and I will draw your attention to those when we get to those. Everything else is somewhere in your handouts anyway. So just kind of call up some background knowledge. Take a moment. You all had little notepads in your packet when you checked in and got your great blue bags. Pull out your notepad, because you'll want that notepad during today's session. Draw a line down the middle of a blank page. And I want you to you can put whatever indicator at the top works for you, a plus on one side, a minus on one side, a square on one side, a circle on the other, just so you know these are going to be 2 different categories of words that I want you to generate. On the left side of your page, write down words and phrases that you think are associated with growth mindset and high expectations. Take a moment, quickly list off words and phrases that you think are associated with growth mindset and high expectations. Put that on the left side of your page. This is the baseline measure. It will not be scored. Just a priming activity. There are no expectations for particular content yet. Okay, what are some of the words that people wrote down? Just kind of call them out anonymously. Yet. Try. Improvement. Resilience. Great, we've got to start. Y'all know a little something about the topic. Now, what are some words that would represent maybe not holding growth mindset, but instead holding fixed mindset or low expectations? What are some words or phrases you, of course, have heard others say that might represent low expectations or represent a fixed mindset? Again, no right answers, just generate what comes to mind. IQ. I can't. Nice build there. I caught that. Don't get it. Done. Any other additions to the words or phrases that reflect a fixed mindset or low expectations? One correct answer. Black and white. Okay. I'll add 2 words to that list. Non-reader and wicked smart. Because I'm from the Northeast, so I can say it that way. Wicked smart. He got it because he's wicked smart. All right, so we've got a starting point. Just as a baseline, you're going to return to that in the final activity, so hold that close. Add to it as you will during the next 90 minutes. And let's dig in. This session is not just about kids with disabilities. So if you're only interested in kids with disabilities, just warning you now, I'm going to rock your boat. Growth mindset actually has to do with all kids, all learners, all adults as well. In particular, I think this quote represents a thrust of the work that has to do with kids who are living in contexts of poverty. I'm particularly interested in that conversation that Eric Jensen lays out here. There's clear evidence that 5 years of learning from above average teachers would erase the academic effects from poverty. I find that very interesting. I want to know how to do that. I also come from poverty. My original home that I was born and raised in was a two-car garage that got converted into a four-room apartment. Every month as I grew up, we were always kind of waiting to figure out which bill was not going to get paid that month. So waking up with the electricity shut off or being out of oil for heat in our house was a frequent occurrence. So I'm really interested in that poverty conversation. And my passion for the work actually doesn't necessarily come out of that context of my personal history. It comes out of a different part of my personal history, and that's my relationship and the perception of me as an individual with a disability and my perception of others with disabilities. So let me dig into that for just a second. I come from Rochester, New Hampshire, which I would not expect you to know. It's a gripping little town. I lived was raised 3 houses down from where my mother was born and raised. My parents were born and raised in Rochester. Their parents, for the most part, settled and lived in Rochester. My mother's only brother lived immediately next door to where they were born and raised, so pretty much our family all lived within eyesight of one another. That was our hood. That was our block. And the Rochester school system really shaped my experience significantly growing up. Our school system back in the late 80s got known for this kiddo, Timmy W, because Timmy W had significant disabilities. And the Rochester School District held that Timmy W was too disabled to benefit from even special education in the local school system. And they made a case for him not coming to the local public school, which they ultimately lost. For those of you who are familiar with the Timmy W case, which set some really interesting policy and precedents in the field of special education for kiddos with significant disabilities. I share that with you to set kind of the historical perspective of my experience in schools, which was similar to what Dan was describing this morning in the keynote. I didn't know people with significant disabilities growing up. My school system was keeping them out. I didn't have that experience. I didn't know people with significant disabilities. And myself was a struggling student growing up. I was kind of a C/D student through middle school. In my 9th grade class, I discovered that grades kind of mattered for predicting what track of classes you could get into. So our school system had heavily invested in ability grouping by tracks. So there was the Gen Ed, there was the General 2 track, there was the General 1 track, there was the College Prep track, and then there were the Wicked Smart Kids track. And you were tracked within the school system. And through 9th grade, I was in Gen 1 track. And I took 9th grade English language arts and was one of those kiddos who, I didn't like summer reading. They would give you 5 novels you had to read over the summer, and then your first grade in the first quarter of the school year was 25% of it was based on what you could recall from the books you read over the summer. Well, I didn't do any of that. I was okay, 25% of my score, first quarter, so I start off with a 75. I could still get a C and save all that time from reading and all that effort from reading. Score. So I did really productive things like smoke pot, steal things, get in trouble during that summer before 9th grade. because I didn't really have a direction. Nobody in my family had gone to college, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to be when I grew up. But during 9th grade, I figured out that I wanted to be a veterinarian and started volunteering at a local veterinary clinic. And he became a mentor in my life who let me know pretty quickly that becoming a veterinarian is more than cleaning up poop and taking care of kennels. You actually have to go to college, and you have to do really well in order to get into vet school. So I was like, okay, got to go to college, have to get good grades. All right, so started to get my head around that in 9th grade, and then figured, well, then that means I have to be in that college prep track. So I signed up for college prep courses for 10th grade, but I was kicked back because I had gotten low grades in the first 2 quarters, because I didn't do the summer reading, from Mr. Nicholson. Of course, he's the one who gave me those grades. It was his fault that I didn't do the reading. So Mr. Nicholson had to make a choice about whether or not he would sign off on me taking a college prep course for 10th grade, and he refused to sign. He didn't think I could handle it, which to this day really pisses me off just a little bit, that he didn't believe that I could handle a college prep course. Now, fortunately, in New Hampshire, our license plates read live free or die, so we believe in choice making. And I chose anyway to take the college prep course in 10th grade, and I did okay. I put in a lot of effort to get a B, more effort to get a B+. 3rd quarter, I got an A-, and then I dropped back into the B range after that. Because I was like, phew, saw an A in English language arts, I'm good, gonna ease back a little bit. And took that A- to Mr. Nicholson to let him know I was doing okay without his endorsement. But it really it had a huge impact on me in how I viewed what I was doing in 10th grade English language arts. Because a teacher had explicitly told me, I don't think you can do this. And there had never been a moment where anybody overtly told me that before. And so I kind of started to believe it, crap, I'll never be a veterinarian now. So it had a huge impact on me. So that's a context for why I care about this. Part of why I'm drawn to topics like growth mindset and high expectations, and how we as teachers and teacher leaders communicate those in practice on Monday, is in part because of my own personal experience of what I experienced from others. I also now realize that I imposed some of those same expectations on other people, or lack thereof. So I never met a person with a significant disability until I got to college. And I was taking my first Intro to Exceptionality course with Jan Nisbet. And Jan was one of those instructors who was really good at getting other people to teach the course. So she would introduce a guest lecturer, and then she would step aside. And she would introduce another guest lecturer, and then she'd step aside. And I thought, I can do that. I could teach at the college level. I totally have that skill set. I can introduce people and step aside. But halfway through the course, and we'd been learning about people with significant disabilities, but halfway through the course, I see this guy in the hallway. He's got a scooter, and he's kind of moving funky, and he's got a personal assistant with him, and he's got a dog assistant with him, and he's kind of drooling on himself. And I hear him making sounds to somebody, his assistant, who then interacts with him and acts on something that he's saying, which I couldn't understand. So I thought, okay, Jan's probably going to talk about him. I had this aha moment, all right, so that's what severe disabilities looks like. Okay, now I know. Okay, so you are a person, I can identify this. I read about it. But I assumed that Jan was going to talk about him. I thought he was Exhibit A for today's lecture. And he wheeled up and he pulled out this big green board that had letters and words all over it, and he started tapping away. And Jan stood off to the side reading what he was pointing to on his board. And he proceeded to give the lecture, which most of it went over my head. And he was cracking jokes that were going over my head. He's talking about disability policy analyses and insights from civil rights, and he's just going off in these big directions. And I was paralyzed because I did not see it coming. I did not expect that. And I kind of knew immediately, I have to get my head around this. And that's my other why of doing this work. That guy was Bob Williams. And Bob Williams went on to work within the Clinton administration as the Commissioner for the Administration on Developmental Disabilities under Donna Shalala within Health and Human Services. Went on, I think at some point he was an assistant secretary. I looked at Kathy Pratt because she has a better memory than me. In one of the sub areas, and now he's still working on the Hill, and I think he's point person on employment for people with disabilities. It's still another assistant administrator commissioner position. No slouch, no exhibit A. The guy's got it going on. And I didn't have the experience base to greet him with that expectation set when I met him. And he's taught me a lot in life. To this day, he's a big why for me to do this work. So I want you to take a moment and just think, why are you here? Why this session? What's your why? What's your connection to growth mindset and high expectations? What's got you interested in this topic? What's calling you to this? Take a moment and just reflect on that. What's your why? And after you have something, find a neighbor and talk with them and share your why. 1 minute each. I'll put two minutes on the clock. Always want to start with kind of like what your prior knowledge is and moving into your personal connection to this. Now we're going to move into some of the content areas here. I'm going to leverage very heavily Carol Dweck's latest book on mindset. And the other big source that we're going to leverage is John Hattie's work on visible learning. Those are the kind of two primary texts behind a lot of the quotes and content you'll see on the slides. All the content area descriptions you can also find in all the resources on the thumb drive. But this is a nifty quote to start us off. The growth mindset is based on the belief in change. And part of our endeavor here is to find the connections between high expectations and growth mindsets in practice. So growth mindset is situated in this belief in change and also situated in kind of the specifics of feedback. So in this instance, in this cartoon, I think the dog is really quite wonderfully articulate in saying, I'm going to need more specific feedback on my assessment than just bad dog. How we play out expectations, how we communicate those expectations in growth mindset becomes really fascinating to me. I recently helped take care of my parents' dog and cat while they were away for 2 weeks in Arizona. And I had to come to Indianapolis for some work for 2 days on the first week. And so my brother covered the dog and the cat while I was out of town. And my phone lit up about halfway through day one with all these texts from my brother. Now, he's 53 years old. And the texts are just pouring in about how he can't get the dog off of my parents' bed to go outside for a walk. And I'm like, really? Dude, you're 53. You can't get a dog to go outside to go to the bathroom. And then the next text is like, oh my God, the dog just peed on the bed. Now what do? I'm like, get paper towels, blot. Like, what do you want me to do? I'm like hundreds of miles away, dude, come on. And I was really frustrated with him. I was like, you know, there's no hope. Like, you can't even manage a dog for 2 days. So I flew back home, and I was really frustrated with him. And we met up on Friday night. He stopped by, and of course, you know, as he stops by, like the dog is sitting next to me and like nuzzling me, and we're all bonded and connected, which really just irritated him. And I was like, well, tell me how you approached the dog, because the dog was abused when the dog was younger. And she's very sensitive to how people approach her. And so I said, you know, show me, like, how did you approach the dog? And he's a big guy. And so he's like, well, you know, I walked into the room and I just said, come on, we gotta go out. Which is kind of how he talks. And I was like, and then when she didn't go, he's like, well, you know, I got louder. I'm like, okay, great. And that's when she peed, right? I'm like, yeah, okay. So let's try something else. I'm like, here's how I approach her. I kind of walk to the side when she's in mom and dad's room, because I know she's like on her turf and she's kind of in her own, like I go into the sideway and I soften and lower my voice and I say, let's go outside, and I just point to the door and then I wait. And he looked at me like, seriously? Really? Like, try it. Let's see if it works. So we hung out in the kitchen, and she, of course, went back down to the bedroom, and it was about time for her to go. And I said, go try it. Went down to the bedroom. He walks in sideways. He says, all right, Gypsy, it's time to go out. And gestured to the door. She hopped off the bed, trotted down the hallway, was ready to go out. I was really ready to give up on him. But pausing for a moment to actually look at what were the strategies you were using to get the outcome was a really important stopping point. Like, let me presume that he actually can learn how to get a dog outside who has this kind of history. But once I saw what he was doing, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, those are the wrong strategies for this dog. Let's give you some different strategies. That's kind of growth mindset in action. Right? The attention goes to the process, the strategies, and effort are kind of three key things that we look at in growth mindset. So the formative assessment feedback needs to look at the process, the strategies, and the effort. Let's hear about the power of yet. Right? Because my mindset while I was in Indy was he's never going to get this, but once I realized and saw him on Friday night, it was like, okay, he just hasn't gotten it yet. He could learn this. So, and you all threw this out as your keyword for what growth mindset might be. Let's hear from Carol Dweck in the power of yet in her reflections on applying growth mindset.
The power of yet. I heard about a high school in Chicago where students had to pass a certain number of courses to graduate, and if they didn't pass a course, they got the grade not yet. And I thought that was fantastic, because if you get a failing grade, you think, I'm nothing, I'm nowhere. But if you get the grade not yet, you understand that you're on a learning curve. It gives you a path into the future. Not yet also gave me insight into a critical event early in my career, a real turning point. I wanted to see how children coped with challenge and difficulty. So I gave 10-year-olds problems that were slightly too hard for them. Some of them reacted in a shockingly positive way. They said things like, I love a challenge. Or, I was hoping this would be informative. They understood that their abilities could be developed. They had what I call a growth mindset. But other students felt it was tragic, catastrophic. From their more fixed mindset perspective, their intelligence had been up for judgment, and they failed. Instead of luxuriating in the power of yet, they were gripped in the tyranny of now. So what do they do next? I'll tell you what they do next. In one study, they told us they would probably cheat the next time instead of studying more if they failed a test. In another study, after a failure, they looked for someone who did worse than they did so they could feel really good about themselves. And in study after study, they have run from difficulty. Scientists measured the electrical activity from the brain as students confronted an error. On the left, you see the fixed mindset students. There's hardly any activity. They run from the error. They don't engage with it. But on the right, you have the students with the growth mindset, the idea that abilities can be developed. They engage deeply. Their brain is on fire with yet. They engage deeply. They process the error. They learn from it, and they correct it. How are we raising our children? Are we raising them for now instead of yet? Are we raising kids who are obsessed with getting A's? Are we raising kids who don't know how to dream big dreams? Their biggest goal is getting the next A, or the next test score? And are they carrying this need for constant validation with them into their future lives? Maybe because employers are coming to me and saying, we have already raised a generation of young workers who can't get through the day without an award. So, what can we do? How can we build that bridge to yet? Here are some things we can do. First of all, we can praise wisely. Not praising intelligence or talent. That has failed. Don't do that anymore. But praising the process that kids engage in. Their effort, their strategies, their focus, their perseverance, their improvement. This process praise creates kids who are hardy and resilient. There are other ways to reward yet. We recently teamed up with game scientists from the University of Washington to create a new online math game that rewarded yet. In this game, students were rewarded for effort, strategy, and progress. The usual math game rewards you for getting answers right now, but this game rewarded process. And we got more effort, more strategies, more engagement over longer periods of time, and more perseverance when they hit really, really hard problems. Just the words yet or not yet, we're finding, give kids greater confidence. Give them a path into the future that creates greater persistence. And we can actually change students' mindsets. In one study, we taught them that every time they push out of their comfort zone to learn something new and difficult, the neurons in their brain can form new, stronger connections, and over time, they can get smarter. Look what happened. In this study, students who were not taught this growth mindset continued to show declining grades over this difficult school transition. But those who were taught this lesson showed a sharp rebound in their grades. We have shown this now, this kind of improvement, with thousands and thousands of kids, especially struggling students. So let's talk about equality. In our country, there are groups of students who chronically underperform. For example, children in inner cities or children on Native American reservations. And they've done so poorly for so long that many people think it's inevitable. But when educators create growth mindset classrooms steeped in yet, equality happens. And here are just a few examples. In 1 year, a kindergarten class in Harlem, New York, scored in the 95th percentile on the National Achievement Test. Many of those kids could not hold a pencil when they arrived at school. In 1 year, fourth grade students in the South Bronx, way behind, became the #1 fourth grade class in the state of New York on the state math test. In a year to a year and a half, Native American students in a school on a reservation went from the bottom of their district to the top. And that district included affluent sections of Seattle. So the native kids outdid the Microsoft kids. This happened because the meaning of effort and difficulty were transformed. Before, effort and difficulty made them feel dumb, made them feel like giving up. But now, effort and difficulty, that's when their neurons are making new connections, stronger connections. That's when they're getting smarter. I received a letter recently from a 13-year-old boy. He said, "Dear Professor Dweck, I appreciate that your writing is based on solid scientific research, and that's why I decided to put it into practice. I put more effort into my schoolwork, into my relationship with my family, and into my relationship with kids at school. And I experienced great improvement in all of those areas. I now realize I've wasted most of my life." Let's not waste any more lives, because once we know that abilities are capable of such growth, it becomes a basic human right for children, all children, to live in places that create that growth, to live in places filled with yet. Thank you.
Some additional information to think about around growth mindset in terms of this notion of yet and where it falls in. She's given examples of some strategies as well of what it can look like. In her book, she writes about 3 misunderstandings, and so part of how I get my head around things is actually a basic strategy that Robert Marzano is a big promoter of, and that's similarities and differences. So I always need to look at the negative example sometimes in order to figure out what the thing is. So I want to share with you these 3 misunderstandings that she writes about. The first one is a misunderstanding that growth mindset is really just having an open mind. Like, oh, I have an open mind. I'm open to differences in the world, therefore I have a growth mindset. It's not what she's talking about specifically, right? She says if you're open-minded or flexible and say you have a growth mindset, that we're talking about what we like about ourselves, not necessarily about growth mindset. There's a difference between being flexible and open-minded and being dedicated to growing talent. So growth mindset as its core is not just am I flexible or open-minded, but what's my practice look like? How am I demonstrating that I am committed to growing talent in the world? What does that look like? Misunderstanding number 2. Oh yeah, praise the process, not the outcome. Right, I got it. There's actually more to it, right? Many people believe that growth mindset is only about the effort, especially praising effort. And children learn that the process they engage in brings about progress in learning, and that learning does not just magically flow from some innate ability. It wasn't that Kathy could do it because she's wicked smart. There was a particular level of effort, a particular set of strategies that she employed through the process in order to make the progress. So we indeed do praise the process, but we tie that to the outcomes. So growth mindset means that we can articulate as teachers what the learning outcomes are that we're aiming for and what strategies, process, and effort steps are linked to getting that outcome. So as we think about our teaching practice, for me, this helps me get my head around growth mindset in terms of I can't just know the learning standard and the desired outcomes, but the sets of strategies and ways to support effort over time that will help kids get there. Finally, number 3, a misunderstanding about growth mindset is just to communicate you can do anything in the world. You can be anybody in the world. That misses the point again about the connection between that thing that you'll be at the end and where you honestly are now and what the steps are to get there. We really want to not kind of just open up this loose approach that puts it all back on the kid. If I say you can be anything, then it's ultimately on you. And it's you can be anything with specific effort, strategies, and process praise. This would be a list I would want you to write down. Maura Hart and I worked together in preparing these materials, and we emailed back and forth, I want to say more than 80 times, and then had several phone conversations trying to boil down, so what are the exact look-fors? Many people who have been in my trainings before know that I'm big on fidelity checklists and performance measures so that we know exactly what it is I'm trying to do so that I can support the effort toward that thing. So here are 5 things to do or look for to know that somebody's applying growth mindset. First and foremost, that you're embracing your own fixed mindset moments, right? It's not I have growth mindset on all things, all arenas, all the time, but there's usually contexts in which I can apply it better than others. So embracing those moments where you have the fixed mindset, like when I first saw Bob Williams, like when Mr. Nicholson was thinking about my potential to engage in 10th grade English language arts, where does it come out for you? Second, creating the opportunity to learn to high standards for all students. And I'm just going to kind of hold that one there and give you 2 examples of that later on. Third, Dweck pushes us to teach for conceptual understanding versus just asking kids to memorize stuff. So what's that deeper conceptual understanding that we can push for? And to give feedback to deepen students' understanding and allowing them, and this is key here, to revise their own work. If the ultimate goal is just that you're going to pass the test, that's different than the goal actually being, let me look at what I've got right, and I've applied like really positive strategies to get myself there, and the ones where I'm not there yet, and now revising my work to figure out which other strategies was I applying that I could use in these other problems to get those right. That's the key. I think that's the big feedback piece there. So allowing students to revise work. That's where I love that she keeps coming back to the yet and the not yet. Fourth, to identify and praise process and effort. So going into things, we need to be able to identify what, again, are the processes, the strategies, the effort required to get to a particular outcome. We're so used to writing lesson plans that focus on the outcome and the standard and not necessarily on the steps and the strategies for getting there. And this gives us a new place to put our attention. With that, we also want to monitor how we're responding to challenges, setbacks, failures in those moments in time, right? To look for our "you're not there yet" response. And I did see you apply these 3 strategies, which could help you with this other part of the work, right? So it's not a failure, it's not yet. And we can still get there. And finally, linking those connections together, which I've already said. I feel like this is the short list. If I were to kind of want to communicate to somebody, what is growth mindset about? What does that actually look like in practice? These would be my 5 go-tos. We'll make sure to upload these slides. You can also just take a quick picture with your camera, and they've recorded it, so I think this is going to be posted somewhere at some point if you haven't written all those down yet. So I'm actually going to leave it up, and what I want you to do, pull out another sheet of paper, and we're going to do a little practice on step number 1. So on another sheet of paper, draw a line down the center, And on the left, I want you to make a list of places where you think you're already doing some of this work on growth mindset. Where am I already identifying and giving praise for the process, the effort, the strategies that are applied? Where am I already doing that? And on the right side of your page, make a list of maybe some opportunities for growth for yourself. Where else might I strengthen how I'm doing that? So left side, where am I already doing this? I've already got some good stuff. You all arrived with strengths. And now what are some opportunities for improvement? I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write that list and then 2 minutes to share with a neighbor that you haven't talked with yet. We're going to move a little bit more into the high expectations, building over from growth mindset. The Dufours back in 2004 wrote about 4 kind of schools of finishing the statement, we believe all kids can learn. And I find this layout to be really helpful because it's more than just believing all kids can learn. You have to know what people say after that to figure out what their version of high expectations is. So Charles Darwin belief, right? We believe all kids can learn based on their ability, based on their potential. Pontius Pilate belief, we believe all kids can learn if they take advantage of their opportunity we give them. So it's on you. I gave you the opportunity, you didn't step up to it, you're done. Chicago Cub fan belief, we believe all kids can learn something. It may happen next year. We'll help students experience academic growth in a warm and nurturing environment. Like it's very-ish. Very-ish. And the Henry Higgins school of belief, we believe all kids can learn and we will work to help all students achieve high standards of learning. It's a very different statement than the other 3. When regardless of student, I'm saying I believe all students can achieve high standards of learning. So it's not just you can learn, but you can get to those standards that we're holding for all kids. You're just not there yet. Sometimes we don't even know what a individual kid's starting point is when we think about what somebody can learn. As we heard this morning in Dan Habib's keynote, IQ is a powerful number. Those numbers carry weight. And sometimes we over-attend to them. And we over-attend to a person's educational history, like Mr. Nicholson did with me. Jack is a student I met back in the early 2000s. He's a kiddo with a label of autism, and I met him when he was in 4th grade. He, like a lot of kids, unfortunately, in the United States still to this day, was a kiddo with autism who didn't have a way to really communicate effectively. He had a 2-finger point, and he had some vocabulary cards that were very limited. And in his 4th grade class, he kind of sat in the back and did different work than everybody else. And everybody on his team described him as functioning at the 2-year-old level. And they were organizing around that functioning level in order to think about what and how to teach him. Well, we came in with kind of this new frame of saying, well, let's presume that he actually can learn much more. But nobody knows what. But let's take the cap off of this whole 2-year-old functioning thing, and let's explore some other options of things that we could try. And we explored some communication supports with him and some behavioral supports with him. And we got into some academic choice-making stuff with him, but it was all still fuzzy through 4th grade as we did this exploration. But we started seeing lots of things that he could do, like make 2- and 3-word sentences in a very structured routine that was kind of impressive, given he had only been really doing 1-message responses up to that point. We entered 5th grade, and in 5th grade they read novels. And we're in a general ed 5th grade setting, supporting Jack, and the teacher introduces the novel Maniac Magee. Anybody? Awesome book, good read. Introduces Maniac Magee as the upcoming thing that the class is going to be engaged in. And we met as a planning team. We're like, what, how, when are we, like, what is this going to look like for Jack? And she had all these end of unit exams. Like, she knew exactly what she wanted kids to get out of every ounce of that book. Every chapter had a plan. Like, she had it going on as a teacher. And so we were like, okay, he's never read a novel. Just handing him the 5th grade novel and kind of saying good luck probably is not enough of a scaffold, even though it does give him the opportunity to learn. Opportunity to learn being point number 2 under Carol Dweck's little checklist there. Like, you got to get into the learning and have the opportunity to engage it. So we're like, let's pick a starting point. And one of the things we did was we took the Maniac McGee book and we rewrote it to a late 1st, early 2nd grade level. I share this with you to say we had no clue what we were doing. We didn't have any measures on him to know that that was a good reading level to start with. We were just trying something. So part of growth mindset and high expectations is looking at an opportunity to learn and engaging kids with something to figure out the starting point. So we knew he needed some kind of books to reference. We weren't sure that he had any kind of silent reading comprehension, so we set up classmates to read. We said read with him, but really the message was read to him. And we rewrote these books, as I said, to late 1st, early 2nd grade levels. We had classmates draw pictures that represented events in different portions of the book, which actually is a really good teaching strategy for comprehension. And then we took their pictures and put their pictures into the book with the rewritten text that we had. Free labor. It was awesome. And we got peers to read with him. We were like, focus on skills like having his finger follow the text while you're reading with him. So he's doing tracking, left to right, top to bottom. Like, that's a emerging literacy skill. Help him orient the book the right ways, like hold it upright. Like, really emergent literacy skills. Not sure what Jack was getting from the content, but putting him in it so that we could start to figure out other things. Well, we had a small handful of classmates who were doing this reading with him, who we kind of recruited. And then they had the first chapter test on the Maniac McGee book. Now, we had rewritten it according to the teacher's tests and unit guides. So all the answers that you needed were in the rewritten version, which the kids who had supported him figured out when they were taking the quiz. They were like, oh yeah, I've read this part before. I know this really well. And then word got out that Jack had the Cliff Notes of Maniac McGee. Suddenly we had all these peers volunteering to read with Jack. And the more he got into these literate exchanges with his literate peers, the more we started to see behaviors that looked a lot like reading. He would pick up the book and he would track the text independently with his finger, making sounds. And we were like, maybe we should actually ask him questions about what he's reading and not just track these other emergent literacy skills, which we started to do. And he was getting them right from an array of 4 choices. He was answering questions that were in the quizzes. We had worked on lots of different communication supports for him over time, paying attention to narrative stories that helped him make sense of new activities in the classroom and visual schedules so he could get close to the instruction. And one day in class, he hadn't really used his new communication device actively in class. He was doing it in very kind of scripted therapeutic exchanges. This one day, toward the end of the Maniac McGee book, when we knew he was getting something out of the content and had been engaged in repeated reading around different chapters, the classroom teacher was summarizing what had happened thus far in the book. So she had everybody brainstorm. What have we read so far in the Maniac McGee book? And she's writing things down on the front of the room. And Jack has his adapted book, and his paraprofessional is sitting with him very close. And she's trying to flip to different pages to point to what other kids are calling out. So she's really trying to make sense of the moment for him. And he keeps flipping the pages back and tapping on this one line, on this one part of another page. And she keeps, kind of redirecting him like he's stimming on this other page. Let me redirect you over here. And he keeps going back and tapping on this one place. So she stops and she reads it. And she raises her hand, and the classroom teacher calls on Jack, even though she has raised her hand, and she says, well, Jack's pointing to the part of the story where Maniac McGee lived at the zoo and ate what the deer ate. And the teacher goes, oh my gosh, you're right. We totally forgot that part. Let's add that to the list. And she puts it up there. She's like, good job, Jack. And she keeps going with the lesson. Of course, there's this momentary look amongst the adults in the room. Like, did that just really happen? Did he really just correct the class? So we kind of go with that. She's wrapping up the lesson because once she had all the things on the board, she broke the class into groups and gave them printouts of his communication boards from his communication device, which had some limited vocabulary in there. And so they were expected to talk about the events for Maniac McGee using Jack's communication display. And then she stopped the activity and she said, okay, write what other words you'd need in order to communicate about this story. So people enhanced the little boards and kids wrote all kinds of new phrases on there, which was also free labor for us because then we took their words and used it to reprogram the device. So she's collecting up all this feedback and she puts on the projector at the front of the screen his communication display. And he pulls over his device and he taps like 3 links into the device, and he hits the words, I love you. And he looks at the teacher. And he hits it again, and he looks at the teacher. She can't hear it because she's far away in her backs and she's not getting it. So Dottie gets her attention. And she says, what, Jack? And he hits it again. And she's like, oh, I love you too. Now let's get back to work. And she brings it like she just doesn't miss a beat. Now this is the first time he's initiated a comment in open large group lecture. He is following everything that's happening. So she wraps up the activity, gets everybody off to recess or lunch, and then she just turns around, she looks at me, and like the tears are already coming down. And we just all stood there and had ourselves a good cry. Because here was this kid who was getting the content, getting the exchange and the priority socially of what had just happened in the classroom, and really liked that it was all about him, and was loving her for that. She came into our next planning meeting carrying the rest of the novels for the school year. She dumped them onto the table and she's like, we're adapting every single one of these books. And she, as the general ed teacher, took charge of our team from there on in. She really guided us through the process of manually adapting books for Jack. She created the opportunity for him to learn, that step 2 of growth mindset. She had very high expectations that he would eventually read at grade level. And she kept pushing us to rewrite the novels at higher and higher grade levels because she wanted to find out what the breaking point was for him. At the end of the school year, by about April in the school year, we saw a young boy who would go to the reading center, pick up an adapted book, go and sit down, open it up, and independently start reading text. And a kid who is now passing 5th grade quizzes on the content. All because somebody said, we should be trying to teach you to learn to high standards. Right? Really kind of putting the practice into action. With Jack, we didn't have a way with Jack for him to kind of estimate where he thought he was. We were still really developing his communication system. It wasn't quite there yet. So the point of his story really is about that opportunity for the learning. Within John Hattie's work, he's going to bring us to applying that same skill set, but more particularly with kids who might have good communication systems, and maybe kids who don't have the extent of disabilities that Jack was experiencing in that story. How many of you are familiar with John Hattie's work? Thank you, Kathy. Great, so 3 of us know it. John Hattie spends his time thinking about the research in the field and how it connects to what works in schools. So he's really interested in things that give the greatest effect on student achievement. So I want you to pause for a moment based on what you've heard so far, and I'm going to give you 3 things. And I want you to kind of think about these 3 factors in schools and rate them as low, medium, or high effect on learning. So, teaching to learning styles. Low, medium, or high effect. Just write an L, M, or H on your table, that's fine. Teaching to learning styles. Retention, holding kids back, low, medium, or high. Tracking by ability, like what my high school did. And formative assessments for teachers, like evaluating how teachers are doing their teaching and giving them feedback on their teaching practices. So there are 4 things. So the first one was learning styles. So where would you put that? Low, medium, or high? High. It's actually quite low. It's actually around a 0.2528 right in here. It's actually below what we would hope for. Next one was retention. Where would you put retention? Low. Actually has reverse effects. Actually has a negative effect. Third one was tracking. Where would we put tracking? Low. Low to negative, it's actually in the developmental effects zone. Fourth one was formative assessment on teachers. Where would we put that? High. It's actually quite high, right over in here. Okay. So let's just quickly look at some other examples here. Student expectations of themselves for their learning. Off the charts, 1.44. If we can get students to predict their grades and then achieve past their own expectations, and we're actually going to watch a video on how to do that, huge impact on learning. So retention over here, reverse effects, and then ability grouping and tracking, developmental effects. Hattie's work is really worth a look. If you just Google John Hattie ranking of effects, he has lists that he keeps regularly updated where you can kind of go and check your teaching practices against that list to kind of figure out, am I picking the highest leverage teaching approaches here in order to get the best outcomes? So before we get into unpacking self-reported grades, I want to just pause for a minute and give you a chance to make some sense, because I set this up by bridging from growth mindset and Dweck with opportunities to learn and Jack's story. And now I'm bringing you in specifically to the another high expectation examples. So far, what's the connection between growth mindset and what you heard in Jack's story? Take a moment to kind of take some notes down. What's the connection between growth mindset and that story I just gave you about Jack? So what were some of the connections you made between that Jack story and growth mindset? What are some of the things that strike you? I'll narrow that down. Let's start with this portion of the room. One thing from one of the 6 of you, one connection you made. Yes? Great, so creating the opportunity, keeping that word yet in mind. Like, no, he's not demonstrating that yet, but let's figure out what the constellation of supports are that will elicit that, because we didn't know what they were. Great. This section of the room, something from the Jack story that connects to growth mindset for you. So linking over now to high expectations. And what about it communicated high expectations? Okay, great. So setting up the instruction such that all kids are participating in it. You kind of don't give the choice of not playing, right? So great, excellent, nice connection there. Connection from this quarter of the room. So going back to the opportunity to learn, okay? So providing the opportunity. Okay. And any final addition from this quarter of the room? There it is, right? So setting kids up to teach one another, wonderful. Peer-assisted learning, nice high effect size on that. Also cooperative learning, which is different than small group or partner working, but cooperative learning also very powerful. This teacher was in part leveraging class-wide peer tutoring. She had everybody tutoring one another. So right on what you're pointing to. That's great. Nice addition. Okay, so you've got some connections there both on growth mindset and high expectations. Now I want to give you another strategy related to high expectations from John Hattie, and that's this leveraging of student self-reported grades, where what he's basically going after is set kids up to tell you what they expect of their performance, and then develop a strategy for getting them past what they expected. That's his big punchline. But what I want you to do as you watch this short video of him describing it is I want you now to create your own checklist. What would be the look-fors? How would I know if I am or if another teacher is applying John Hattie's self-reported grades strategy? There are about 3 or 4 steps to it. So as you listen, see if you can identify what those steps are. Part of this is I don't want to give you that list. I want to kind of coach you to develop those because you're going to have to adapt those when you get back locally anyway. And you'll have the link to recheck the video if you want to watch it again. So let's take a look at this short video from John Hattie. And you're watching to create a list of key steps.
Self-reported grades comes out at the top of all influences. Now what that means is, right now, I've taught a series of lessons, I'm going to give you a test. Now before you do the test, I want you to predict what grade you're going to get. Kids are incredibly accurate at doing that. In fact, the most accurate thing that we do in our whole system is they know how they're going to perform. Now that's great, but on the other hand, it raises a couple of questions. The first is, you've got to seriously ask why we test kids. In fact, my argument is very simple. The only reason you test a kid in the classroom is to find out what you, the teacher, has done well, what you haven't done well, and with whom. There's not much point doing it for the kids because they know. But here's the killer. What students so often do is they set safe targets. They say, for instance, like we used to do in our university days, well, if I can get a C here, I'm doing okay. I haven't done a lot of work, so just passing's okay. Or maybe I can get a B+. And they set safe targets. Our job, I believe, is to mess that up. Our job is to never meet the needs of kids. It's never to help kids reach their potential. Our job is to help kids exceed what they think they can do. And so understanding what targets they set when they go about their work is important, and our job is to say they can do a lot better, which means giving them the confidence they can do it. Obviously teaching them the skills so they can do it. If I was redoing it again, I'd probably relabel self-reported grades as student expectations, because that's really what they are, is the expectations students set for their work. And my major and loud message is that we need to get in front of that. We need to raise those expectations and give the students the confidence and the skills and the understandings that they can exceed. Doing their best is never good enough.
Find a person in the room and share your list with somebody else to see if you can kind of reconcile your lists. Did you come out with the same key factors? Again, there's 3 or 4 in there that I heard. So find somebody in the room, check your list. All right, let's see what we've got for the lists. Some different groups, I'm hearing different key components, and we're all in the same wheelhouse here. So you can just stay right where you are, and let's just do a quick check on what you all are coming up with. Let's have at least one pair share their list. You want to start us off from the corner? You had 3 essentials there. Yeah, she's about to add to you.
I was going to first self-report their grades or what they're.
Okay, so have the student predict their grade.
Yes.
Great, okay. So the list that they were coming up with was have the student self-report, check to see where the kid actually landed, develop a plan for 2 things. You were talking about confidence and skills. I think you had both on yours. Okay. So theirs was a 3-point checklist. Have the kids self-report, then actually compare to what the result was, and then the teacher makes a plan for developing the kids' skills and confidence. So that was their list. What's another list? Kind of, what are some things that you have? Like, are other lists similar to that? Other lists different? Yours is similar. You want to? Great. So you're adding one in there. Never let them reach the target, right? We're always kind of saying, all right, now, and what's next? Yeah. Okay, and what's next? Great. That's wonderful. Never settling, right? Great. That's awesome. Any other additions or additions? Okay. So here's the connection point. with the skills and confidence that your group was talking about. The skills that we're looking at are process skills, strategy skills, and effort. There's our connection point. So when we're drawing up that plan, how am I gonna get you to the next place here? I want to figure out, my plan's going to include in it how I'm going to praise your application of process skills, how I'm going to build your ability to sustain effort and self-regulate. So how many of you are familiar with Universal Design for Learning? Okay. There's a whole, one of the big guidelines is around engagement, which starts off with recruiting for personal interests and lands on self-regulation. That's what Dweck is talking about. That's your other cheat sheet. So if you're looking for how am I going to help kids persevere, that's the word I'm looking for. I knew it was a P word. Persevere through and build their effort and sustain their effort. Go to UDL, go to the engagement guideline and look at those checkpoints. There's your cheat sheet there. So we can turn that growth mindset, match it with Hattie's strategy for self-reported grades as a way to approach high expectations, and really turn it into a kid-specific action plan, which means we've got to shift our attention from just knowing our standards and our good teaching approaches to what are the strategies and processes that kids are using that are getting them there successfully. Because that's the stuff we want to acknowledge and praise and kind of reinforce, draw their attention back there. You now do some sense making. You've got an example of high expectation strategies in self-reported grades. You've got Dweck's list, the 5 components for growth mindset. You've got the Jack story kind of weaving in some pieces of both of those with this attention to process, effort, strategies, and how I'm going to link those to achievement. In a Venn diagram, what do you feel like you're summarizing for growth mindset and high expectations? And particularly pay attention to this thing in the middle. Where are they the same that I can go do? What can I take away from this? Would be the overlap in the center. What can I take away that brings those two things together for my practice? I'm going to give you a few. How much time do I have left, Jana? 10 minutes. Oh, we're ahead of schedule. I'm going to give you 4 minutes to make your summary graphic. What's your current understanding now of the relationship between growth mindset, high expectations, and kind of how they come together? This might be a good time to refer back to your initial list of phrases. So let's do some wrap up here. Anything people want to share out from their summary reflections? No forced share, I'm just leaving it open. I can tell that the brain can only take in what the butt can endure. Most of your butts are done. But any insights people want to share from their notes? You're like, if we don't have to, I'm good now. Okay, so let's do a wrap here. Hattie brings this together for me by just reminding us of the impact that we can have on teachers. So take a moment and breathe this in. The major argument underlying powerful impact in our schools relates to how we think. It's a set of mind frames that underpins every action and decision in a school. It is a belief that we are evaluators, we are change agents, we are adaptive learning experts, we are seekers of feedback about our impact. We engaged in dialogue and challenge, and we are developers of trust with all, and that we see opportunity in error, and are keen to spread the message about the power, fun, and impact we have on learning. You have some possible look-fors that you can choose to or not to apply when you leave here. You can choose to or not to apply them with a variety of students in a variety of settings. I think the biggest kind of homework I would encourage you to do is to start an internal dialogue with the times and contexts in which you find yourself holding high expectations and applying growth mindset strategies, and to acknowledge and kind of describe for yourself those times when you're maybe applying a fixed mindset or lower expectations. When does it bubble up for you, and have a dialogue with that part of yourself. That really is the essential to kind of getting over. There's no kind of right, I've now achieved growth mindset, now I can give myself an A+ and move on. Right? It's really that continued work. So this is a big challenge. It's a big invitation to you. And if it completely freaks you out, please leave with just this quote under your arm and have a great afternoon.